I remember as a teenager really liking this show called The Conversation. Essentially, it was kind of like a women-focused series. She spoke to like various like famous and/or successful women about their upbringing, the wisdom that they've kind of gained over time. And I really liked it as like a 14-year-old. Who I think was either consciously or subconsciously looking for some guidance about how to think about the world, how to interact with the world. Near the end of the video, she would always ask the person who she was interviewing the question, what would you say to your 14-year-old self if you could go back and tell her anything? As someone who just turned 28 and as someone who still finds herself feeling lost a lot of the time, it's funny to think about the fact that I'm actually at an old enough age to answer this question. And frankly, it's comforting to consider the fact that even though I feel lost a lot of the time now, it does not even begin to compare to how I felt back then, whether or not I realized it. So I thought it would be fun to make a video specifically paying homage to this question of like, if you could go back and tell your 14-year-old self anything, what would it be? With the slight tweak of like, if you could go back and if you could tell yourself anything as a teenager, what would it be? So without further ado, my name is Mackenzie, and this is my channel Think Too Much. And in today's video, I'm going to be answering the question, if I could go back and tell my teenage self anything, what would it be? Now that I'm older, I wouldn't want to change anything. So, and maybe I'm taking the question too seriously, but I wouldn't want to change anything, and I think that that means that like, I wouldn't want to tell my 14-year-old self anything that like I didn't feel like was an important thing to learn on my own, if that makes sense. So I came up with two things that kind of felt like something I could tell my teenage self that would still require me to kind of earn the lessons I eventually learned over time, but maybe provided a little bit of clarity and guidance in kind of reaching those lessons learned. So the first one, and this one feels like the most important one, is that nothing cool ever happens to people who go through life successfully avoiding embarrassment. I need to make an important kind of clarification or point something out that feels important about this statement, because I think a lot of the times we hear that like success does not come without failing first. Whatever, like you hear it a million times, like I get it, I need to fail. Still don't want to, but I need to fail. I get that. I think that's of course true, and that this can coexist with the point that I'm making here. But failure is a little bit too narrow, I think, or it can be too narrow. Failure is usually a source of shame for people. But I felt like for my teenage self in particular, I needed to hear that like embarrassment is a requirement. Like you don't get to go through life and not pay the fee of embarrassment, because being a teenager is so embarrassing. I think it's often the blow of, I don't know, one's first like super embarrassing moment or just like experiencing any sort of embarrassment. I imagine as a teenager it would have been very comforting if someone was like, you know what, you don't really get out of being a teenager without being embarrassed. In fact, you don't really get out of living an interesting or just like a life without having some form of embarrassment sometimes. And I'll tell you what, the embarrassment is actually a good thing. Like really good things come from the embarrassment. If not just like the confidence of like realizing you can stomach embarrassment and survive to like tell the tale. Also because like if you're doing something that puts you at risk of being embarrassed, you're probably putting yourself out there. And if you're putting yourself out there, like find like one potential outcome is embarrassment, another potential outcome is success. And like, what if you are successful in the thing? What if you were both embarrassed and successful? Embarrassment is a good thing. And I think that teenagers need to hear that, because one, they're going to be embarrassed a lot because they're teenagers, which sucks. I'm sorry. And two, I think it's important to reframe it as like a positive thing, because good things come of embarrassment. Interesting things come of embarrassment. Lean in, baby. Another reason why I think this advice would be really important for like teenage me to hear, and maybe other teenagers to hear, is that when I was a teenager, I tried so hard to control my life. I was tempted to say everything, but it wasn't everything, because I didn't necessarily want to control what other people did, or I wasn't like a controlling kid, but I did have this like immense fear of not being able to control like myself, how others perceived me, my future, how successful I was, how unsuccessful I was. And I think a lot of that stemmed, well, a lot of it honestly probably just stemmed from like the anxiety of being a teenager. But the other thing that it stemmed from was this like really deep fear of like being embarrassed. But I think that I was so scared of being embarrassed that my response to that was to try to control everything, and like specifically how people perceived me. And like not only did that in some ways kind of lead to me having like an eating disorder as a kid, which like I figured out a way out of, and like I actually have a great relationship with food now. I have a video that I made about that. But I think I also kind of held myself back from certain experiences for fear of being embarrassed or out of control. And so again, like I wouldn't go back and change anything because I don't know, you just kind of got to learn the lessons the way you learn the lessons. And honestly, I think if I had been told as a teenager, like, oh, well, the embarrassment is actually like a good thing, I don't think it actually would have prompted me to seek out embarrassment or like do the things that I was worried might embarrass me anyway. But I think that when the embarrassment inevitably came, I would have been a little bit more accepting of it, because I found that by the time I got to college, it's almost like the realization just like slapped me in the face of I can't just keep holding myself back from these experiences because like I'm afraid I like can't control the outcome and I'm afraid that like I'll be embarrassed. I guess came to realize like how much I was allowing myself to like sit by and not experience, all kind of in deference to this fear of being embarrassed. And that realization allowed me to break out of like the shackles that I'd kind of unknowingly kept myself locked in. And I don't know, I just kind of realized, oh, like the embarrassment thing is kind of inevitable. Like the embarrassment is like the spice of life. It's like the product of just like trying to do interesting things, trying to do like things that are out of your comfort zone, trying to do like, sure, like embarrassment sometimes comes from things that like aren't going to make you a better person. The motto that I eventually came to that kind of helped me through a lot of the exploration and the experience that came with college was that like maybe I was embarrassed or maybe I'm feeling like a little bit embarrassed right now, but it's better than like not having lived. And yeah, I think I kind of credit that attitude with just a lot of growth that happened when I was in college, and yeah, just like a lot of really important self-understanding that I would not take back. And I just think that it would have been helpful if like someone had given me that advice earlier on in my teens. Honestly, if I could go back and tell my teenage self one thing, it would be this thing: to let go of control and critically understand that embarrassment and failure will follow. But that is a good thing, because nothing interesting will come of the tight grip of control that you attempt to keep. The embarrassment is to be expected, and it is a fee that no one cool or interesting has ever been able to get by in life without paying. So pay the fee of embarrassment. It's worth it. It makes life a little bit more fun and colorful on the other side. The second thing I would tell my teenage self if I could go back in time, it's this: your youth and your inexperience living within your own body and living with your very special brain that operates in its own very special way comes with some serious disadvantages, which is to say it gets better. I think that's something that I think it's maybe this point is like often made in the framing of like, oh, it gets better, but I would want to be more specific because I don't think it was ever that helpful. I guess it was comforting when people would be like, it gets better, but it wasn't really clarifying. So I think if I could offer like a clearer message to teenage me in the vein of it gets better, it would be that your lack of experience living within your physical body and like understanding your emotional, mental way of being is a serious disadvantage. And the experience that comes from just living life and existing will help make it better. That is part of what makes it better. You just become more attuned to your physical body, you become more attuned to your mental, emotional self, and then you're just better prepared to handle the shit that life throws at you, whether they be physical or mental and emotional. I'm being broad, kind of intentionally here. One example on like the physical side is that when I work out after just having been in a plane, I tend to be lightheaded. That may seem small, but I feel like when I was younger, that would happen and I'd be so confused, and like I would convince myself that I had just like lost any athletic progress I had made before traveling and would get all in my head about it. But now I just realize it's something that happens. It doesn't mean I'm like wildly out of shape. It's just a thing that happens after I fly. And yeah, for like mentally, emotionally, I guess I won't get into specifics, but I just know the kind of like little mental patterns that my brain falls into. I know like the little habits that my thoughts kind of inevitably follow, and it just kind of helps in taking oneself far less seriously. And part of what's so difficult about being a teenager is that you're taking yourself really seriously. And you're probably taking yourself really seriously because you don't know what the f is going on with your brain or your body. So you kind of don't have any other choice. At least that's how I make sense of it. But yes, so this piece of advice number 2. You really have no idea what's going on up here, how it operates, or like how your body operates either. That's okay. It'll get better, and you'd be surprised at how much it improves your life. Yeah, I really enjoyed that question, that prompt as a teenager, and I enjoyed as a 28-year-old too. I think it's like comforting, especially feeling lost. And if you haven't already watched my quarter life video, I explained some of said lostness. I'll link that here. But I think it's comforting to kind of think of the ways in which I was far more lost as a teenager than I am now. That's it for this video. This was a fun one. And I guess like if you feel so inclined, like comment below how you would answer the question, what would you tell your teenage self if you could go back and tell them anything? Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.